Welcome back to another Heavy Metallurgy review. I am Melanie from Melanie Loves Death Metal, and today I'm going to be talking about the new Hyperdontia album, Harvest of Malevolence. This came out on June 21st on Dark Descent Records and Meisaku Unocho Records. It is their third full-length album consisting of 8 tracks that are 40 minutes long. Perfect album length in my opinion. This is a 4-piece hailing out of both Denmark and Turkey, consisting of Malik on bass, Tuna on drums, Mustafa on lead guitars, incredible guitarist, also in the band Engulfed if you're not familiar, and then Matthias, who is also on guitars and vocals. This is also his second album as the main vocalist in the band, and he also is from another band that you might be familiar with, Sulphurous. Those are just some call-outs. Him and Mustafa have been in several other bands, but those are the ones that I wanted to note. Amazing album artwork on this album. It is done by the legendary Wes Benscotter, so just wanted to call that out. Huge fan of this artwork, and I think it goes pretty well with the overall sound of what you're going to expect with this album. If you're not familiar with Hyperdontia, in my opinion, they are by far one of the best new wave of old school death metal revival bands that came out in the early 2020s around the COVID time frame when there was just a surge in that sound. I feel like they're a little bit underrated. Maybe not, people don't necessarily throw their name out there enough, but they do what you would expect them to do in regards to that old school death metal revival, is that they just play really good, straightforward death metal. It's pummeling, it's pulverizing, it's aggressive, and it's just really well written. This album is no exception to that. In fact, in my opinion, I think this is their best album that they've come out with so far. Their 2 preceding ones were very good, and I was big fans of them, but again, this one just blew away all of my expectations, so I'm very excited to talk about this today. One note that I want to call out is that the production is simply fantastic on this. Now, with old school death metal sounding albums, you don't necessarily get that production value sometimes a little bit more dirtier. The mix is kind of off. That is not the case for this album whatsoever. It has got a great mix. Everything is very cohesive and sounds really good together. Nothing is too loud. You can hear the bass, which is incredible, and that's a big standout on this album. Really very juicy bass lines, and I absolutely love them. There's even a couple bass solos on here. The guitars are very well put into the mix. They're not too loud, and you can hear the vocalist. So the production is very, very good. Sometimes these old school death metal revival albums tend to be a little bit more grittier sounding. There definitely is a grit to it, but still with a better production value, if that makes sense. Now, like I said, it's 8 tracks long. Every single song is essentially stands out from their own. They definitely have a similar sound across the board, but the one thing that I want to mention is that there is no filler on this album whatsoever. There are no intros, no interludes, no movie samples, no slowdown, no outros, none of that. This is simply what you would call all killer, no filler, straightforward death metal album. They came to do one task, and that was just to play death metal, and that is exactly what they do on this album. And that is very obvious in the very first track, Death's Embrace. It just starts right out the gate with a catchy guitar riff, fast pace, in your face, aggressive death metal. It's got those old school death metal growls that Matthias has had in his past releases. Just really sets the tone for what you're to expect for the rest of the album. Salvation in Death is the next song, and this is by far one of my favorite tracks on the album. It has, once again, catchy guitar riffs, fantastic bass on this song, and around the 3-minute and 30-second mark, there is a great bass line that is very prominent. Man, it's so juicy. It sounds so, so good. This also is coinciding with Mustafa's amazing guitar soloing that he does across this whole entire album. He is just a very good guitar writer, and the solo on this album really is what makes it a good standout across the board. The other track that I wanted to make sure I called out, and this is definitely another one of my favorite tracks, is the fourth song, Pestering Lamentations. Probably said that wrong. This is a little bit more of a slower paced song compared to the previous three that you had just heard. It's got a little bit more of a slower, chunky, and just a heavy death metal song. It's not as fast paced and aggressive as what you were previously hearing, but it has an amazing bass build up in the beginning of the song. It leads into catchy guitar grooves and riffage, and then of course Matthias's growls that come in with that. It has a nice gallopy like guitar riff with about a minute and 15 seconds in that gets stuck in my head. I feel myself like bobbing my head when it comes in, and that again comes in later on in the track. It's just another fantastic song with another fantastic guitar solo and one of the more slower but groovier songs on the album. That's a little bit of a different take from their past albums, so I like that this variance was in here. Just a little bit more of a different side of Hyperdontia that we haven't necessarily seen all that much in their past releases. So it was nice. That was by far one of my favorite songs on this album. The other song that I want to make sure to call out was the sixth song, Irrevocable Disaster. Butchered it, but you know, you can look it up. It's fast and in your face from the start. This is by far one of the most aggressive and fastest songs on the album. Nothing too much like standing out here other than just that it's fast and aggressive, and it's a death metal song. It's got chunky and catchy riffs. It's very catchy. It has gotten stuck in my head several times. It's got pummeling bass, very pummeling drums, and like I said, it's by far the heaviest song on the album. So this again was another one that stood out, and the bass on this song is so juicy and so good. That bass line on this album is by far one of my favorite things about it. I love when death metal has a standout bass value to it, when you can hear it and they play a part, and this album does that perfectly. Again, much of this other songs, the last two songs, Defame Flesh and Servant to a Crippled God, I think that there are probably some of the better songs. In my opinion, this album is a little bit more backloaded. I tend to find that I like the final 4 to 5 songs a little bit more than the first couple of songs. However, you might feel that differently. A lot of times albums are more front loaded and you don't necessarily appreciate the later half of the album. For me, I tend to really start to get in this album just really like feeling it and just pump, like, you know, air guitar, air drumming is when it really starts within the 5th track. The final 2 songs on this album, they ended out perfectly. It's, again, more groovy bass, pummeling guitars, catchy guitar riffs, catchy guitar leads. I mean, that is essentially just the theme of this whole entire album. My final thoughts are, if you are a fan of straightforward death metal, this album is for you. It's got great guitar riffs, like I've said 100 times. It pummels you with the drums and the bass. It's got Matthias's old school death metal deeper growls. It's a technical album and sophisticated guitar riffs without being too pretentious, which is what I really appreciate about this album. It doesn't have too much dissonance. It's not going over the top or trying to be revolutionary. It's not really doing any of those things. It is just doing exactly what Hyperdontia does well, and that is paying homage to old school death metal in a modern death metal world. Like I said, there is no time to rest on this album at all. The no filler is by far one of my favorite things about this. Sometimes I get kind of sick of the intros and the movie samples and the interludes and the dissonance that can be there. And sometimes I just want to listen to death metal that I'm used to hearing, that I'm familiar with. It's direct, it's to the point, and at many times you can hear influences of Bolt Thrower and Morbid Angel and even Incantation. So they definitely pay homage to this style of death metal that we all love so much. This is something I will play countless times this year and for many years to come, because again, like I said, it's familiar and it's comfortable for my ears. It's what I tend to want to listen to when it comes to extreme metal music. There is only one negative thing that I have to say about this album, and I can see this being a criticism for others, is that in terms of the vocal variants, there really isn't much. It is a pretty straight across the board, similar style of vocals throughout the whole entire album. It is just the deep old school death metal growl that you're used to hearing from Matthias. There's no raspy screams, there's no low guttural screams, there's no pig squeals, none of that. It is just straightforward deep growl throughout the whole entire album. I can see some people finding that to be a little bit boring, maybe even hard to decipher from different songs. If they tend to not pay much attention, they may feel like they're listening to the same song for that reason. So that is really my only negative thing about this album. But however, that it's not such a negative thing for me to deter from it or to think that it's not a good album by any means. Like I said, it's a straightforward death metal, and sometimes simple is the best approach, in my opinion. And sometimes when bands try to do too much, especially within death metal, that can deter me. And this is the case of where they do what they do best, and that is paying homage to old school death metal. That is all that I have today. Let me know in the comments what you think. Super pumped this album is out. It's definitely going to be one of my favorites to come out this year. I will see you guys in the next one.